Welcome to the second episode of Rock and Roll and Biblical Wisdom. I am Jeremiah Childers.
I'm Sarah Hanks.
And today we are going to be looking at two songs from the band The Rolling Stones from 1965, I Can't Get No Satisfaction, and 1969, You Can't Always Get What You Want. I think both of these songs kind of overlap in their meaning. And we'll also be looking today at biblical texts from Ecclesiastes 5 and from Luke's Gospel. So let's begin just by listening to some of the lyrics. Again, we can't play the music, but we can read the lyrics.
Do you want me to sing them?
Sure. Go ahead and sing I Can't Get No Satisfaction.
I can't get no satisfaction. I can't get no satisfaction. 'Cause I try and I try and I try and I try. I can't get no.
Yeah. And throughout the song, it is, whether it's stuff that they hear on the radio, see on the TV, relationships, there's just no sense of getting satisfied.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of times in life, as we'll talk about, we try to fill our lives with things, and in reality, those things can't satisfy our deepest longings and desires.
Yes.
And our second song is You Can't Always Get What You Want. And I'm just going to sing probably my favorite part of the song, and we'll talk a little bit about it. And it's later in the song, and it says, I went down to the Chelsea drugstore to get your prescription filled. I was standing in line with Mr. Jimmy, and man, he did look pretty ill. We decided that we'd have a soda, my favorite flavor, cherry red. I sung my song to Mr. Jimmy, yeah, and he said one word to me, and that was dead. I said to him, you can't always get what you want. Well, no, you can't always get what you want. You can't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes, you might just find that you get what you need. And I was reading about that song, and there is kind of like this mythic legend about the origins of the song, and supposedly there was a drugstore that Mick Jagger went to, and there was a guy named there, James Hutman, who was affectionately known by the people in the community as Mr. Jimmy. And one day he is there, and they're at the counter, and they both order, well, Mr. Jimmy orders the cherry Coke, but they only had regular Coke, and he says to Mick Jagger, you can't always get what you want. And he would often tell people, sometimes you can't get what you want, but you can get what you need. And that was in 1964, and 4 years later, when he's writing this song, he remembers that and writes to Mr. Jimmy. Whether that's a true story or not, it's kind of one of those things that is a reminder that each of us, whether it's something small that we want, sometimes it's a big thing we want, but sometimes we don't always get what we want.
Exactly. But you will get what you need.
So, that's right. So, no satisfaction, don't always get what you want. If we allow those kind of things to motivate us, drive us, give us happiness, what eventually happens in life?
I mean, we're always searching for the unattainable thing. Mm-hmm. And then when we can't get that unattainable thing, we're going to fill the void with something else. Mm-hmm. And so that can either be, drugs, alcohol, sex, sometimes not good things, when really if we were just satisfied with what we have and all that God has given us, then we wouldn't be searching for all of these things that we honestly don't need in our lives.
Yeah. And one of the things I've noticed in terms of like reading about history and reading biographies, a lot of times people talk about the experiences in their lives when things were the worst. Mm-hmm. When they go back and realize they didn't have everything they maybe wanted, maybe everything they normally relied on, but as a community, oftentimes they came together. We think about some of our recent history with Hurricane Helene, we think about COVID, and a lot of things were taken away from us, but the most essential things were still there. Mm-hmm. And we may not have had what we wanted, but we realized we had everything we needed. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we miss those days.
Yeah.
We can romanticize them sometimes, but we miss the time that we had at home with our families. Mm-hmm. We miss the time of no distractions. Hurricane Helene was horrible. A lot of people suffered. But a lot of us during those weeks or the days when we didn't have power, we weren't on phones.
Mm-hmm.
We were playing games with our children.
Right.
So sometimes those kind of experiences can reorient us to say, not everything we want and not everything we think is going to give us satisfaction is really there. So one of my favorite books of the Bible is Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes is a book of wisdom. It is a book that honestly describes reality as it really is.
Mm-hmm.
It's not sugar-coated. It talks a lot about, the nature of life is short.
Mm-hmm.
One translation, you'll read vanity of vanities, but another translation is life is but a puff of breath, It's short, and it's quick.
Right.
And there are things in life that don't make sense sometimes. The bad people sometimes prosper where good people don't. So when we get to chapter 5 of Ecclesiastes, part of this idea of satisfaction comes up.
Mm-hmm.
So would you read chapter 5, verses 10 through 12, and then 18 through 20?
Sure. The lover of money will not be satisfied with money, nor the lover of wealth will gain. This also is vanity. When goods increase, those who eat them increase, and what gain has their owner but to see them with his eyes? Sweet is the sleep of laborers, whether they eat little or much, but the abundance of the rich will not let them sleep. This is what I have seen to be good. It is fitting to eat and drink and find enjoyment in all the toil with which one toils under the sun, the few days of the life God gave us. For this is our lot. Likewise, all to whom God gives wealth and possessions and whom he enables to enjoy them and to accept their lot and find enjoyment in their toil. This is the gift of God. For they were scarcely broad over the days of their lives, because God keeps them occupied with the joy of their hearts.
So I love these kind of just simple facts and realization. The lover of money will not be satisfied with money. And he goes on to say, when the goods increase, those who eat them increase, and what gain has their owner but to see them with their eyes? But he talks about those that labor for what they do. So one of the things we see within Ecclesiastes is kind of those that are abundant in wealth usually do so on the backs of others.
Mm-hmm.
And the people that work the hardest to get the food or get the produce or whatever it is for the wealthy usually don't oftentimes get to enjoy the fruits of their labor.
Right.
Yet, because they have worked hard and they understand that whatever they have is all that they have, they were able to, go to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Sweet is the sleep of laborers, whether they eat little or much, but the abundance of the rich will not let them sleep.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things I've noticed in life is sometimes I worry about things I have, sometimes more than the things I don't have. So, it may be I have, sometimes I've realized that people that have a lot
Mm-hmm.
tend to worry more about the things they have rather than the people that don't have much at all.
Mm-hmm.
So if you've got a big house, if you've got a lot of stuff, one of the things you worry about is it getting destroyed,
Mm-hmm.
it being taken away. If you have a lot of money in investments, you sit up worrying about the markets.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times when we've gone on mission trips, we encounter people that have very little. And their lives seem to be, in comparison to ours, not as good, but they seem to sleep well.
Mm-hmm.
They seem not to be anxious about the things that we're anxious about. And the biblical writer of Ecclesiastes in an ancient world understands that fact too. Is the more you have, sometimes the more you worry about the things you have.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing so, it causes you to be restless and anxious. In a minute, we'll look at Luke's gospel, and Luke tells the story of Jesus giving a parable about a very wealthy man.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that the very wealthy man, everybody that's listening to is probably thinking, what would it be like to always have enough to eat?
Right.
And then the realization is even having enough to eat causes as much anxiety as not having enough to eat.
Mm-hmm.
So more or little can create anxiety, but finding meaning and purpose in life And then in verse 18 and following, it's kind of a recurring theme in Ecclesiastes. It is fitting to eat and drink and find enjoyment in the toil or the work which one does under the sun. A few days of life God gives for us. That's our lot. Likewise, all to whom God gives wealth and possessions, and whom he enables to enjoy them and accept their lot and find enjoyment in their work. This is the gift of God. One of the things that people don't often do enough is to look at what's right in front of them and
Right.
say, this is enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I should find enjoyment in what I have, my family, the work I do, the friends I have, my life.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times we don't do that because we look at other people's lives and compare and say, if only I had,
Mm-hmm.
I'd be satisfied.
Right.
So when have you had experience in your life where you felt like you weren't satisfied?
Well, I think you always want what you don't have, you know, and you're always like, well, if I made more money, or if I had more money, then I wouldn't be as stressed, and it would be so nice to not have to worry. But when you make more money, you spend more money.
Mm-hmm.
So it really doesn't
Yeah.
matter, you know. But yeah, I mean, I just think this is pretty much normal on everyday life, where you're just looking on social media and you're like, oh my gosh, look at how like beautiful their house is, or like, oh, I wish I had a lake house, you know. But in reality, what we need to do is just be grateful for what we have. And it's scientifically proven that if you focus on what you're grateful for, then it totally changes your mindset and your mood. So, I got a journal where I write down things that I'm grateful for, and it really has helped me, stay focused on what I do have and being grateful for that, and not like looking out there and being like, oh, I wish I had this and this and this and this fancy car, and all the things that are never going to happen.
For me, I'm not tempted by people's vacations, like to compare.
Oh,
Oh, I wish I went on that vacation. I'm not necessarily tempted about their house, although kitchens I do like.
Mm-hmm.
I like to
I
cook.
like a nice kitchen.
For me, it's when I'm kind of the person like that gets something, and it's always a television. I love TV. I love this technology of TV. I could talk about the LED, micro LED, the OLED, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I just love it. I've loved it since I was a kid. So anytime I get a TV, the next TV is always kind of the thing.
Yeah.
And I've listened to a study recently about people that get something new versus something old. And I think I've talked about it in my Sunday school class, but the study said that if you got a new TV
Mm-hmm.
and you had an old TV and you went to watch the new TV that's got a better picture, maybe better blacks and color, whatever it is, for 30 minutes, you will notice all the differences.
Mm-hmm.
And then after 30 minutes, it just becomes your normal TV.
Right.
And it said, unless you went backwards for a little bit, you wouldn't notice how good the picture was. And then even if you went backwards for a little bit, you would notice the difference up until your brain would say, this is normal,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to accept this as normal.
Right.
So the realization is, it didn't, not just with TVs, but anything we think we need or want, once we get it, there's only a short period of time where it's new,
Right.
where we feel like it's better, it's different, whatever it is, and then it becomes normal.
Mm-hmm. I feel like like my kids now, they always want something when we go to the store, or like if something breaks, they're like, oh, well, that's okay. You can just buy me another one,
Mhm.
And I just am trying to figure out how to instill the value of being thankful for what they have,
Yeah.
and taking better care of
Yeah.
what they have.
Yeah.
So that's a kind of a challenge with my kids now.
It's a challenge with children. It's a challenge with adults.
Yeah.
Our other song is, you can't always get what you want, but you have what you need. But if you try, sometimes you find you've got what you need. And today I want to look at our second passage, and it comes out of Luke's Gospel. And in it, Luke 12, Jesus gives a parable, and I'm going to read that. Someone out of the crowd said, "Teacher, order my brother to give me a fair share of my family inheritance." And he replied, "Mister, what makes you think it's any of my business to be a judge or mediator for you?" And speaking to the people, he went on, "Take care, protect yourselves against the least bit of greed. Life is not defined by what you have, even when you have a lot."
Mm-hmm.
Then he told this story. The farm of a certain rich man produced a terrific crop. He talked to himself, "What can I do? My barn isn't big enough for this harvest." Then he said, "Here's what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. Then I'll gather in all of my grain and goods. And I'll say to myself, Self, you have done well. You've got it made, and you can now retire. Take it easy and have the time of your life." Just then God showed up and said, "Fool, tonight you die in your barn full of goods. Who gets it?" That's what happens when you fill your barn with self and not with God. That's from the Message translation. And Jesus is saying a rich person can have so much abundance, and in their abundance, they can feel like they've got everything made, everything's good.
Right.
In reality, you can't control the number of your days.
Mm-mm.
But he also says to those that are listening, he continued with this subject with his disciples, "Don't fuss about what's on the table at mealtimes, or if your clothes in your closet are in fashion. There's far more to your inner life than the food you put in your stomach, more to your outer appearance than clothes you hang on your body. Look at the ravens, free and unfettered, not tied down to a job description, carefree in the care of God.
Mm-hmm.
And you count far more. Has anyone by fussing before the mirror ever gotten taller, so much as an inch? If fussing can't do that, why fuss at all? Walk into the fields and look at the wildflowers. They don't fuss with their appearance, but have even more color and design. Quite like it. The 10 best dressed men and women in the country look shabby alongside them. If God gives so much attention to the wildflowers, most of them never even seen, don't you think he'll attend to you? Take pride and to do your best for you. What I'm trying to do here is to get you to relax, not to be so preoccupied with getting so you can respond to God's giving. People who don't know God and the way he works fuss over things, but you know both God and how he works. Steep yourself in God reality, God initiative, God provisions. You'll find your everyday human concern will be met. Don't be afraid of missing out. You're my dearest friends. The Father wants to give you the very kingdom himself. Be generous. Give to the poor. Give yourselves a bank that won't go bankrupt, a bank in heaven, far from bank robbers and safe from embezzlers, a bank you can bank on. It's obvious, isn't it? The place where your treasure is, that's the place you will most want to be and end up being. And that's the Message translation, and you can go back and read NIV, NRSV, and you'll see some differences there. But the crux of it is Jesus is saying the rich worry about what they have.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes the people that don't have worry about what they have. And in doing so, let's just be honest, it keeps us from being generous.
Right.
And Jesus says the kind of treasure that you should store up in heaven isn't necessarily the things that you want on this earth in terms of fashion,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of the best food, but instead in showing love and showing grace and helping provide for the people that aren't just not satisfied, but just don't have enough.
Right.
Where the man who had all of the extra crop could have given it to those in his community,
Mm-hmm.
his concern was about self.
Right.
And oftentimes, if we're not honest, we're all selfish.
Mm-hmm.
We'll look at something we want, and we'll look at something we could be doing with our time, our money, our talents, and say, if I do that, I can't have this.
Mm-hmm.
In reality, we probably got everything we need, and in abundance, we have enough to share. When have you had a time or experience in your life where you found it hard to be generous?
I think like when I am, when I was younger, I worked at the credit union and we only got paid once a month. And so come like towards the end of the month, I would like be eating peanut butter and jellies, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll never forget, I was, I had went to Hardee's and I got biscuits for everybody. And that was back when Hardee's biscuits were only $1. Mm-hmm. And I asked everybody to pay me back $1 each. And still to this day, I will never forget, one of my coworkers was like, you must be really hard up if you can't even spend $1 on a person.
Yeah.
And that you're like wanting it back. And I still think about that to this day where I'm like, that was just really, like, why did I fret over $1? But I think it was because I just didn't have a lot of money. Mm-hmm. But, I could have afforded $1.
Yeah.
And so I still think about that moment. That had an impact on me. And, I think from that day on, I was like, no matter how much I have, I want to still be generous and give to others because I hated how I made her feel and then how I felt afterwards.
I think for me, it's the times I've been generous, but done so begrudgingly. Or, thought to myself, I'm doing this. I hope they're appreciative.
You want like recognition?
Maybe recognition, or just that, whatever I'm giving has benefits that will help change or shape somebody to do better. Mm-hmm. And in reality, for me, that's not a really good sign of generosity. Mm-hmm. And that's part in me when I have to say to myself, you know what you just gave was a gift. Whether it is to a person, whether it is to an organization, whether it's to the church, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And as a gift, you don't put restrictions on it.
Right. And you don't say, hey, I hope I get a thank you card for that gift.
Yeah.
And
or you don't, if it's a gift, you don't say to yourself, there should be some measurable outcomes. Mm-hmm. Or that, I should see results.
Right. Or you want to be paid back.
Yeah. And for me, that's something that, over time I've been able to work on, but still sometimes it comes back and you say, I shouldn't hesitate to give because I want something out of it. Mm-hmm. It should just be out of generosity. And that's a struggle.
Yeah.
I think the struggle that we all have, especially in seasons where we have been generous to people or to organizations and things, and then seen it not work out. Mm-hmm. And you feel like, okay, part of that satisfaction is you want to know where your money goes, mm-hmm. that it goes for a good cause or a good reason. And sometimes you question that. And sometimes if I'm trying to get something out of my generosity, I'm not going to be satisfied.
Right.
I should have just kept the money.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like you have to like change your mindset, Yeah. You can't, you're just going to give. You don't want anything in return. And what if you could give anonymously, Yeah. That would, just starting small and doing things like that, you're changing your mindset of like, I always want to just have recognition or they owe me or stuff like that.
Yeah. And sometimes it's, it's been when you've given money to family or you give money to individuals. And that's something you just have to kind of work out is say, it was a gift.
Yeah.
It was a gift.
Maybe it didn't start out as a gift, but now it will be.
Yeah. As we kind of close our time together, I hope that as you've been listening today, we've looked at 2 songs from the Rolling Stones. Most of us have heard these songs over and over again at some point, mm-hmm. whether on the radio, in movies. They're older songs, but being written in the 60s when kind of there's a lot of seasonal change happening during that period. A lot more commercialism is happening mm-hmm. during the 50s and 60s, and kind of that countercultural movement that comes out of some of the things are starting to say, you know what, the things that we thought were going to make us happy aren't making us happy.
Right.
And I think even today we have to look at our world and say, what are the things that have promised us happiness mm-hmm. that never fulfill it? Yeah. And part of that is, something as simple as our phones. There's always a new phone with a new mm-hmm. camera, with a new thing. Right. If we get the latest and best, we'll be happier. In reality, it's still the same.
Right.
Um, Ecclesiastes over and over again says, nothing's new under the sun. And the chasing after, one translation, the chasing after wind, something you chase after in life that you can't hold on to, that you can't grab. It just goes through your fingers. And that's kind of what, Ecclesiastes, but these two songs are kind of talking about. Things we chase after in life, whether that's money, whether that's positions, whether that's respect, whatever it is that we're chasing, oftentimes is not the most important thing. Because the most important thing is our relationship with God and our relationship with others.
Right.
And those are the things that Jesus tells us are our priorities. And those are the things that if we want to be satisfied, if we want to have the most important thing, that those are the things Jesus calls us to do.
Right. You can have a huge house, but be very lonely inside.
You can have a huge bank account and not know really what to do with it because your heart's always in the wrong place.
Yep.
Well, as we end today, we hope that you will join us again next week as we look at another rock and roll song and talk about biblical wisdom. Recommend this podcast to your friends. We'd love to get some more listeners, and we hope you have a good week.
Can't always get what you want.
I know, like you sticking around forever.
Aw.
We're going to miss you, but for those that haven't heard, Sarah Hanks has taken a position at Spartanburg Regional for chaplaincy, and we're proud of her. And we hope that she can continue her work in ministry and fulfill her calling. And we might not get what we want, but we know we get what we need. And that's you continuing to journey in your ministry. Have a good week.
All right, bye.